Good evening and welcome everyone to the Indianapolis Recorder. We have a wonderful panel discussion for you on this evening. My name is Larry Smith. I'm a columnist with the Indianapolis Recorder. And on behalf of my co-moderator, Kelly Doucette, we would like to welcome you on this evening. I'm going to just give a few opening remarks and then I will turn it over to our co-moderator to introduce herself, and then the panelists will introduce themselves. This is October the 27th, 2020. This is a very interesting day in history, given our topic for tonight and the season that we're in, 1 week from the election. On this date in 1791, President George Washington gave the results of the very first census to the Congress. On this date in 1873, a man named D.B. Downing was given a patent for the first mailbox. And so we know that a lot of people are going to be voting by mail and have already voted by mail this year. In 1917, there were 20,000 women in New York City who marched for suffrage. And I know that's a topic we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then finally, this is the birthday of the legendary actress and civil rights leader, Ruby Dee. She was, those of you who saw her movies, also with her husband, Ossie Davis, they were not only great on the screen, but they were great in the streets, marching and advocating for civil rights. Finally, just a couple of words that we use very, very frequently, but often don't think about really the impact. And so those words are democracy and vote. The word democracy is often translated as the people rule, but a more accurate translation is actually power to the people. The word demos is Greek for people. The second part of the word krasi is from the Greek word kratos, which means power. So the word democracy literally means power to the people. And then the word vote, if you translate it, it literally means to make a solemn promise or vow. And so as we take seriously the franchise, what we refer to as the franchise, it's not important simply to register to vote. The purpose of tonight's panel, which is nonpartisan, the purpose of tonight's panel is to encourage you to actually vote, no matter how you do that, whether you mail it in, whether you go and stand in one of the lines to vote early, or you wait until election day. We cannot urge you strongly enough to please go vote. That is our solemn responsibility. So with that, we'll turn it over to Kelly Doucette.
Hi, thank you for having me. So again, my name is Kelly Doucette. I am here this evening to represent the exchange at the Indianapolis Urban League. It is the young professional affiliate of the Indianapolis Urban League. More specifically, I am a 2019-2020 fellow for the exchange at the Indianapolis Urban League's Leadership Fellowship Program. So we have done a lot of work in educating voters, specifically young voters in the Indianapolis community. And so it's just a really great opportunity to speak with you all this evening. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our amazing list of panelists for this evening. So I'll go ahead and have Ms. Rosalind go ahead and introduce herself.
Well, hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm so grateful to be here. I appreciate the invitation. My name is Rosalind Shropshire. I'm a life resident of Indianapolis. I've been in community service and advocacy for a while now. We don't have to get into ages or anything like that. I'm a member of several groups who actually help try to get out the vote. We're interested in various things, empowering people and all of that. So I'm just really grateful that the Recorder included me in this. I'm also an author. I've written a history book. It's just an eclectic mix of Black history essays that just give you an idea of what our history has been in this country.
Ms. Tracy, I'll have you go ahead and go next.
Thank you. Good evening, and I, like Ms. Rosalind, am honored to be a part of the esteemed panel that you've put together and at such a critical time in history. I'm involved with a number of charitable organizations and nonprofit. Martin University is represented tonight, and that's one of my first loves. I am a graduate of Martin University. I also serve in the leadership of Steward Speakers, and I'm honored to be a part of that organization as well. I hope to get the opportunity to tell you a lot more about Get Out and Vote, which is an initiative that I wrote this cycle, just learning in the primary when so many folks were in a tailspin on what to do, where to vote, and just a lack of information and education really motivated me to go ahead and write the Get Out and Vote initiative. And it's based around registration, education, and transportation. And we partnered up with Dr. Posey, and he'll share more about that when he gives his greetings. But the key is what Larry has already mentioned is it's okay to register, but we have to vote. We have to finish it. So I'm honored to be here and look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Devon, we'll have you go next.
Like the two prior to me, I want to say thanks to the Indianapolis Recorder for having me. I've always been a big fan growing up as a kid right here in Indianapolis. My name is Devon Davis. I'm a public policy specialist with Bowles Public Affairs Group. I assist clients from a wide range of industries in managing legislative projects, which includes a deep review in state legislation. I meet with policymakers and work with clients to develop full-scale public policy strategies. Before coming to Bowes as a public policy specialist, I was the chief deputy of voter registration in Marion County. So I look forward to the conversation tonight.
Awesome. Dr. Huddleston?
I'm truly honored to be here, and I must say that Tracy Boyd is absolutely one of my favorite alums and people who really embrace Martin University. I am very, very humbled and honored to be the 5th president of Martin University, which many know is Indiana's only predominantly Black institution of higher education. And so it is an honor to be on a panel that is being hosted by the state's only Black publication, newspaper. This is an enormously important time for us in our community as well as in this country. And it's an important topic for us to be talking about tonight. And so I'm really thrilled to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Posley.
Hello, everyone. And I agree with those who've gone before me on this panel in telling you how much I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm humbled by the privilege. There's so many who could be on this panel, on this prescient panel. So I'm delighted and humbled to be here. I am Clyde Posley. I've been the pastor of the Antioch Baptist Church for approximately 20 years. I've been a pastor here in the city of Indianapolis for just about 30 years. I'm also an author, and I'm also privileged and pleased to be a graduate of Martin as well, where I also worked as a professor for some time. So I'm honored to be here. This is the type of conversation that we hope there can be more of, and that can lead to the type of performance, if you will, that says we do more than protest, but we perform the rest of protest. And so I'm excited to be here with these great thinkers.
Thank you. This is an exciting panel, very powerful panel. So let's get started with our first question of the evening. And panelists, please feel free to jump in. So with election being approximately 7 days away, we have moved past getting voters engaged in registering to vote, but making sure that they are in line and or getting their absentee ballot in an appropriate amount of time so that it can be counted. So with that said, how have you taken your positions and your influence in the communities to explain why voting is important and engaging the folks that you are talking to about why it's important and or how to do it?
Well, I don't mind jumping in if, I'm sorry, Brother Posley, please go ahead.
Well, I was just about to say that, I have, the power of the pulpit. And I am a pastor that does not believe there is a separation between theology and the necessary practicality that social justice demands. And so I believe that the follow through of the principles of morality and theology are how we are carried out in social justice. One quick example, and I'll get to the point I wanted to make, is the first miracle of the church was a disabled man in the 3rd chapter of Acts, a disabled man who had economic problems and emotional problems with his friends, bring him to a bad spot every day. And so I believe that I have tried to use my platform to make sure that I explain what it means to be politically active and why voting is necessary. I have a 5-minute political moment every morning of the Sunday morning worship. It's a part of it. And so we live that out. Right now, we're living it out by souls to the polls. We're actually carrying 8 locations have actually carrying registered voters to places to early vote, sitting there waiting on them, providing them what they need, and getting our feet to the pavement, getting them actually to the polls. So that's just a couple of ways that I am, and my church directly causing that important thing of voting to come to pass, actually come to pass.
That's really impressive for sure. I will say that for us, most people know that education and voting have been tied together since the very beginning. There are 2 things that they did not want us to do. They didn't want us to become literate, and they didn't want us to vote. As a matter of fact, for about 70 years, from the 1890s to the 1960s, there actually was a literacy test that you had to pass in order to be able to register to vote. So for us, as we talk about education being the key to freedom and certainly being a civil right, we think that voting is right with it. And so what we've done, we've integrated the importance of voting and connected it to our teaching to show how the 2 are related, to certainly encourage all of our students, faculty, and staff to vote. But the second thing is that Martin has always been a university, right? So we are in, of, and for the community, and we've never done anything on our own. So we recognize that collectively, our voices are higher and louder. And so we've also been encouraging through our partners, our community partners and others, we've been encouraging others to exercise that right. The last thing I'll say is that, as I mentioned earlier in a different conversation, we've been connecting this idea of radical activism and collective activism. Radical activism is raising your voice when you absolutely don't have access or haven't been heard. Collective activism is doing something about it. So if you look at the peaceful protests and the demonstrations that have occurred in and around our country, and certainly in our city, that is about radical activism. Enough is enough. The collective activism part is, what are we going to do about it? And the best way to show that is to vote.
Sometimes when I've worked on different campaigns and we've been out there canvassing and getting the right out to vote, I don't mind bringing up the gruesome detail that so many people have died so that I could vote. This history has been it's been terrible for us in so many ways. And so when I think about all the people who wanted to vote and died trying, there's no way I can not vote. And so I bring this up not to scare people or to discuss them, but to show them that they have a moral obligation to now go out and vote, since so many people have died so that you can do it. Now, voting has always been tied to citizenship. And for us, citizenship has not come easy. In fact, we were never meant to be citizens. But the fact that we were first freed, then granted citizenship, then granted the right to vote, Black males anyway, that much alone should let you know that you have an obligation to those who have gone on before you who couldn't do that. And so, like I said, I don't mind bringing it up, as gruesome as it is, but it's an important thing for us to know. Our history in this country is just as important as anybody else, and I can find value. I can find all kinds of interesting things, the way that we should embrace this country because we are citizens.
If I could just add, the witnessing of so many entities in our community coming together has been a pure delight. There's a list of people that I can name on one hand, probably two. Souls to the Polls, Get Out and Vote, all of the churches involved, Martin University, the Recorder, the Urban League, Radio One. And I think that is powerful that we're witnessing this moment as a collective. I'm excited about the momentum that we've picked up, and I hope and pray that it will not end on November 3rd and it will continue, and that we'll be able to turn some of this protest, which voting is protesting, into policy changes. And I know I'm getting ahead a little bit, but I hope that's certainly where these conversations and protests lead us to.
I think from my standpoint, I've done something in regards to groundwork. So getting out and canvassing with elected officials and candidates running, being a part of speaker panels such as this one, and volunteering with Marion County voter registration, barbershop talk, gym talk. Elections are our chance to stand up for what matters most to us and have an impact on the community and our future. The leaders we elect make decisions that affect our daily lives. So, just having talks with people and knocking on doors and kind of spreading the word is the route that I've took.
Awesome. Ms. Rosalind, I'm going to go back to you for just a second. I think as we get into it, again, we're 7 days away, but that doesn't mean that we're taking our foot off the gas by any means. And so for the people that are listening, can you give maybe a historical background as to why we are at the point that we are today when it comes to voting? Because I think any information that we can give people as to why it is so important makes our argument just as strong.
Well, I'll give you, I know nobody likes history, especially for the dates, but I just want to give you just a little snippet of a date or two. 1870, there were Blacks who had been freed. Now, women were not allowed to vote, but Black men were now allowed to vote. This is again tied to citizenship. Those people did not want us to vote because I'm so sorry, I've got ringing going on everywhere. They didn't want us to vote because this made us citizens just like them. But when it all comes down to it, this is tied to who we are. This country really never meant for any non-aristocrat or non-wealthy person to vote. There was no universal white male suffrage, not until the 1830s did that come along. But here now you've got Black men voting. Well, what does that do for women? Women have had 100-year history before they even got the vote of trying to get the vote. And so now these women want to be heard, and finally they are. 1920, women have the right to vote. Black women, not so much, because many in the South, with the Jim Crow laws and racial segregation, aren't allowed to vote. And then we're coming to 1965, the Voting Rights Act. That kind of recodified everything that 1870 15th Amendment said for Black men. And it said Congress has the right to enforce laws to help people vote and to keep them from being disenfranchised. It said that in 1872, but Congress ignored that. But this time they weren't being ignored. So here we are in the 60s, the civil rights movement, hot and heavy. Again, voting comes up. Now, why do you think all of these Black people are so interested in the Democratic Party when it was not the party of Lincoln? Democrats came about for Blacks in 1936. Now, 1932, we have FDR. He comes along with sweeping social reforms. And he says, I'm everyone's president. Nobody had ever said that before. So here we've got a man who's working on social issues, trying to help people come back from a Great Depression. Well, Blacks are still part of the party of Lincoln. There are people who have been slaves still alive. There are people who remember the war still alive. And they remember those radical Republicans who helped them vote. So they are still in that party. But come 1936, FDR's second term, everybody sees not just his social reforms, but they see economic improvement. He created jobs all over the place. In fact, everybody's talking about socialism and all of that today. I think he was a socialist and he got away with it. And then Blacks, 1936, overwhelmingly became Democratic Party. There've been ebbs and flows here and there, not that much, but still overwhelmingly Democrat, because by the time they left that Republican Party, it was really no longer Republican Party. It was Dixiecrats. It had moved into the South. Reconstruction had been banned. Now they were really taking over and enforcing these Jim Crow laws that really disenfranchised Blacks. So here we are, 80% of us Democrats. That's where we are today. Now, like I said, there are Black Republicans, and I have voted for one or two, but I tend to vote racially. And if your face is Black enough, and I can listen to you in a way that is understandable to me, then I could vote for you. But basically, it's been the Democratic Party for the vast majority of us. And we need to explain that to young people who didn't grow up the way we did, with certain restrictions on who could go here and who can go there. But whenever I'm talking to young people, I know who I'm talking to. People who don't have a clue as to the things that we had to march for, the things that we had to go through. So there you are, you Democrats, you.
As someone who majored in African American history, we have been treated to quite a history lesson so far this evening for everyone who is listening. Just another bit of history in terms of dying for our rights. There's a school here in Indianapolis that is named for the first person to die in the American Revolution. Obviously, that man is Crispus Attucks. And so here in this city,
Go Tigers.
Go Tigers. My grandfather played with the Big O, with Oscar Robertson. He was a couple of years older than Mr. Robertson was. But that is our legacy, even right here in Indiana. We recognize the importance of the right to vote, what it means to be a citizen, and so on. Shifting to the next question, we frequently hear the phrase public policy, policy changes, policy this, policy that, but do we really know what that means? And so we're going to ask Devon, what is public policy?
Public policy to me is the opportunity to create change. A lot of times we say that public policy is simply what government does or does not do about a problem that comes before them, or consideration and possible action. Public policy is best described as the broad area of government of laws, regulation, court decisions, and local ordinances. To me, public policy is made in response to some sort of an issue or problem. Public policy is made on behalf of the public and is ultimately made by the government. And there's no doubt that there are many problems in our communities that need to be solved. Some problems may be dealt with by actions taken in the private arena, individuals and families, or by our civil society. But public policy are problems that are those that must be addressed by laws and regulations adopted by government.
Thank you for that explanation. Very, very clear and succinct. Ms. Boyd mentioned the importance of continuing to be engaged after the election, after next Tuesday, and we're hopeful that everyone will take that to heart. Dr. Posley, you mentioned Souls to the Polls. You've been responsible for organizing that. We appreciate that effort. How can we hold elected officials accountable even after the election? You know, you're a pastor. I'm guessing probably once or twice elected officials have come to your church to asking to speak ahead of the election. You may not see them until the next election, or they may not make that request until the next election. So as a pastor, as a community activist, what can we do to ensure that we're putting pressure on elected officials to be accountable even after the election?
Well, and thank you. One of the things we can do, of the many, Dr. Huddleston mentioned earlier, and that is educate our people, in my case, my constituents, our people, about what they should expect from the people they have elected. And so they have to remain engaged. They have to be informed, such as this. They have to go to local grassroots, stay involved in local grassroots politics. They have to be informed about what the city county council is actually doing that most directly affects them. Who are their school board members? Why they need, if they choose to vote democratically for the president, why is it important that they vote straight Democrat or straight Democrat for Congress? And I'm speaking theoretically in that, you have a greater chance. It is a fact that you have a greater chance to see the movement that you want on a federal level happen if you started at the local level in terms of your ideologies and participating in the Democratic or Republican process all the way. But another thing that we can do is place demands. Don't simply when you have forums, and which is why I'm okay with politicians coming to my church, but because they will tell you that mine may not be a church they want to just run up in. And when I say that, because if they get to the podium, I allow my people to ask the question. If you're coming to them to tell them to make promises in that period, I think they have a right to ask you, will you so-and-so, since this is the forum that you made. And this was not uncommon to Black churches years ago. And so to actually place demands on them and let them know that I'm voting for the issue that is relevant to my life. And so if I can't make demands of you, once I learn what your responsibilities are, I need you to know I may give you my vote this time. I may very well not vote for you next time because you did not do what you said. And we need to keep engagement such as town halls and various things like that and opportunities to learn before the people so that they can say that to the politician and the politician knows this will not be for free.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Posley. Ms. Boyd, same question to you, since you started us off here with the importance of staying involved outside of the election. What do you suggest? You're obviously very involved in a lot of community-based activities. What can we do?
I really echo many of the things that Dr. Posey has already shared. I encouraged when we had our march a couple of weeks ago that the elected officials make themselves known by raising their hands so that people could request meetings with them, coffee, tea, dinner, it really doesn't matter. I think engagement in education is twofold. I think the responsibility lies with both of us, but to the point that Dr. Posey made, if they're not lining up with our morality and the values that are important to us, then should they continue to represent us is the question. If I could just pivot just a little bit in my journey, this particular cycle, I really learned that a lot of people in Indiana do not realize felons can vote in Indiana. I wish we had a community agreement or something where every Black organization could post that on their website, because I had to convince so many people to register to vote. So I just really want to take it personal that we push that message out, because there are a number of people that are not voting because they think because they're a felon that they cannot vote. In the state of Indiana, as we know, that is a state-to-state law. That is not the case. So I think just continuous education and engagement is something that I think would really change the trajectory of how we all think and feel about voting, the political process, elected officials. They actually work for us and they're not untouchable. And I mean that in the best way. It is a collective. We have to work together to get things completed.
Larry, can I just add just a little bit to that?
Please, Dr.
You know, I think another part of the story, I absolutely agree with everything that Dr. Posley and Tracy said. Absolutely right. We got to hold them accountable. We've got to raise our voices so that they know they're important. But the other thing is, I quite frankly think we have to get off of the sidelines. We've got to get involved. Devon talked wonderfully about the idea of public policy, right? We can help shape and form policy. So for example, if we want to vote for a candidate who believes in supporting minority-owned businesses, right? We got to give them the ammunition to be able to do that and show that it's important. So we need to be supporting minority-owned businesses, let those dollars talk. And when they see where those dollars are going, then they'll get more behind those issues that matter to us. But we absolutely, I think far too often, you know, we hear about what a politician believes. We say, I'll vote because of that. maybe they do something, maybe they don't, and then 4 years later, we don't address it again for 4 years or 2 years or whenever the next election comes on. I just think that we have to, as Tracy talked about, and Dr. Posey, we have to be engaged, we have to get off the sidelines, and we have to hold them accountable with our feet and our dollars.
Larry, if I might, relative to public policy, voter suppression is such an issue.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our effort in terms of public policy for us as African Americans needs to be centered around public policies that stop deconstructing our citizenship. Because without the right to vote, we are lame duck citizens. Without a fluid right to vote, an unhindered right to vote, then all other public policies are hindered by our lack of ability to speak freely. I don't know if we need compulsory voting like other countries do or what, but we have got to make one of the centerpieces of public policy activity in terms of engagement, stopping the process of deconstructing our citizenship by taking away our right to vote in sneaky, Martin Luther King in 1957 called them conniving ways.
Those are two very important points: voter suppression, and then sort of the public policy, if you were around voting. There are many. It used to be poll taxes, grandfather clauses, things of that nature. They would tell you you would have to recite a certain passage from the Constitution. I mean, if it wasn't simply outright show up and you to vote and you see what happens to you, see if you go home, right? I mean, so. And I don't want to stereotype. I want to be very, very clear about this, but I've had many conversations with some of our younger, particularly millennial friends who emphasize the right to vote, what really changes. And my simple response to them rhetorically is, if voting is not important, why do they still try so hard to keep us from voting, right? And I haven't gotten quite an answer to that question yet. But even if you look at a Republican judge in North Carolina said that the policies there were designed with pinpoint accuracy, targeted at African Americans to keep it. You take a voter ID law, for example. Well, who is that going to affect? The elderly, African Americans, other people of color. So couldn't agree more with that. And then in terms of the policy aspect, well, first the constitutional aspect, most people don't know there is no constitutional right to vote. It is not in the Constitution. I would hope that at some point we would convene a constitutional convention to add that amendment to the Constitution, and hopefully some of these other issues would go away. But even if you look at, we're one of the few Western advanced countries that does not set aside voting as a holiday. You put it on a Tuesday where most people have to get up and go to work and so on. And so we just put all these barriers in the way. In some countries, particularly, for example, in Latin America, you're fined if you don't vote, which I would certainly be strongly in favor of. So even the public policy apparatus around voting, or the lack thereof, very, very troubling in this country. Dr. Huddleston, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, voter suppression is simply in my opinion, is the manifestation of institutional and structural racism in the voting process. I mean, from the time that voting was introduced, voter suppression was also introduced. And when the 15th Amendment came out and said that, everybody should be able to vote, that is when it began. So you talked about it correctly. You mentioned poll taxes and, these requirements for owning property and the literacy. That's what I talked about before. All of those, and they still exist. They just exist in different forms. So when we talk about being woke, right, we talk about this idea of being woke to institutional structural racism. It still exists in this form. And so if we're going to stand against all the other things that help to personify and protect structural and institutional racism, then we need to do the same thing as it relates to voter suppression. So I agree with you, Dr. Posey. It is a matter of public policy.
And along the lines of even being woke, and I want to stay narrow with this subject here, but I think in our culture, I know we're going to talk about Black men a little bit later, but But even in our culture as African Americans, I think we need to engage a little bit more in a balanced brain wokeness rather than right side thinking wokeness. Just very quickly, as you all know, the right side of your brain is where you get your emotions from that meet with your amygdala in the front. The left side of your brain is where you get your reasoning and your principles and your truths from. And so so many times, even our voting is moved only by our emotions instead of that which is true. Dr. Huddleston, some of the things he talked about, these are some realities that your vote was, that gerrymandering and suppression started at the time we were supposed to have the vote. And so we're getting upset about things like a crime bill, when the truth of the matter is, what about the country? What about the impacts beyond the crime bill? You cannot just let anger drive your vote or my disdain for someone. That's a part of getting educated to vote as well. We've got to learn to push truths that are best for a country versus only voting an issue that helps me get even. And so that's a part of voting engagement that can push policy, that can help us be intelligent about how we use our brain and voting and not just vengeance.
Mm-hmm. If I could add a couple of remarks, a visual, just to give an idea on voter suppression right here where we are, there are approximately 1 million people that live in Marion County. We have 6 early voting locations.
Versus?
There are 338,000 people that live in Hamilton County, and we have 8 early voting locations. In Hendricks County, we have approximately 170,000 people, and they have 5 voting locations. In Hancock County, they have about 78,000 folks and 5 locations. So my point is this, that is a healthy picture of voter suppression. Those lines wrapped around the buildings. We've just opened those early voting locations in Marion County as of last weekend. And that is a picture, because everyone is not scholarly and they're not going to go after the numbers, but they can see. And that is what voter suppression looks like. And those are opportunities post the election that we can take a look at and take a deeper dive and say, why is this the case? And what can we do about it?
And consistently the case.
So I think that there is a lot of power in voting, right? There's almost all power in voting when it comes to our politicians. And in listening to what you all are speaking about, the one thing that kind of stood out to me is how much I don't think that the weights are even when it comes to who holds the responsibility in how our communities are pushed forward. So there's a lot of effort for our communities to get out and vote, for us to hold our politicians accountable. But do you think we put enough pressure on politicians to understand that they can be voted out? And do you think that we have enough behind us as communities? Do you think we put in enough effort to make sure that we have candidates in place that when the time comes, if we need to vote someone out, that we have a viable candidate available to us that will speak to our views, to the things that we need, to the policies that we put into place?
Yeah, I think in the African American community, that's one of the areas where we lack. Those are some areas where we absolutely lack. And if I could be more pointed, as among Democrats, traditionally, Republicans are savvy. They start the preparation process for the next candidate immediately following the election. They go to work on grooming and starting the process. And so we can never really hold people accountable sufficiently, in my view, unless we do just what you said, have someone that they are aware of that has momentum and has following and has the juice, if you will, to replace them next voting cycle. And those types of conversations need to be had. We need to, because the real pressure has to, on a politician, to be honest with you, and I'll move, let someone else speak after I say this. The real pressure on a politician is the fear of losing that election. Mm-hmm. And so that's the conversation that we need to keep. Listen, what you're concerned about is not being a politician. We're concerned about you lying to us. And so we have to keep that conversation going without fear of being considered radical, as Dr. Hudson talked about. We're talking political survival here. And we are depending on you. We gave our vote expecting you to give us what we're asking for with your ability to do so. So we have to keep that conversation public and a person, so to speak, in our pocket. I don't mean to use the word threat, but to let them know there is someone we're grooming if you don't do what you said.
I think it's both and. I think we should do it regardless. And I think that's an opportunity to invite our millennials to express the frustration that they have. I had many conversations like Rosalind and like Larry with our young people. They are not engaged. They understand the Electoral College to some degree, and they understand they voted for Hillary in 2016, but she didn't win. And it's just an enormous conversation. But I think inviting them to walk down some of the history that they are not really have any allegiance to. They don't have a connection to the folks that have died, and for the opportunity that we could all vote, they do not connect with that history. So I think if we would educate and include them into these future talks that we're having, that we have a better opportunity for them to become engaged. And we have a better opportunity as a party as well to include our young minds in the future.
I would love to see more coalition building, right? Where, yes. Because my concern is that far too often we're fractured in our approaches, right? Now, we know that the Black community is not a monolith in no shape or form. There are multiple communities and cultures that represent the African-American community, if you will, as many people talk about it. And more often than not, we get hung up and others get hung up in what delineates us, what makes us different and why we're not a monolith, as opposed to really kind of coalescing around an issue or a topic. In some respects agreeing to disagree, but in other respects, identifying where that strengthening, right, that construction happens so that we can all move forward. And so with that being said, it also means as we think about how we cultivate and build the people who are going to represent us, we also have to think about that from a very diverse and inclusive perspective. And we can't think that there is a profile that has to be met, right? And so we've had some great conversations about millennials, but who's helping to shape millennials to run for office? I mean, a millennial can be in office just like someone as old as me, who's 119 years old, can be in office, right? And so, I think that it works best. We see it in our classrooms at Martin University when we have an 18 to 24-year-old student and a student who's 35 or 40 or even 60 in a class together. They learn from each other and they find this common ground to be able to get over the hump together. We've got to find ways to do that and understand that we are so much better. We always talk about inclusion and equity and why it's so important. We got to practice it together. And so that's where I think our greatest opportunities will come, by building those coalitions.
I second that. My biggest thing was for me growing up and getting in this field that I am is my mentors. A lot of times I tell my friends, what I do and who I work with, and they're like, bro, what does a lobbyist do? Or what does a public policy specialist even do? It looks boring. But little do they know, it's really the policies that shape and how they move and what they're doing and, what they're eating and other things in that nature. So I think it's, if it wasn't for my mentors and me just growing up and them kind of taking me under their wing, showing me the ropes, I know there's no way I would be where I'm at right now, just because, it takes somebody else to bring you into that inclusion, to bring you in them circles, have that conversation with you and kind of teach you the ropes. My pride wasn't too big to understand that.
But Devon, not to put you on the spot as the voice of young Black men. But since you are a young Black man, much has been said. There's been a lot of hand wringing with regard to getting young Black men out to vote. We know the sisters are going to be out there in force, in some cases kicking and screaming, bringing us with them, kicking and screaming. But what can we do affirmatively to attract more young Black men to go out and, well, first of all, to understand the importance of voting, and then to get them actually out to vote?
I think some of it's, teaching them the ropes, talking to my friends in my close groups and just asking them, hey, why don't you guys vote? Why don't you guys take the process seriously? A lot of them talk about dealing with bigger issues, like the killings of unarmed Black men and women, unemployment, the wealth gap, and how they feel like, who's in chair really doesn't affect their lives. So I've been sitting here and just listening to some of you all and kind of taking in what you're saying, so I can go back and tell them, hey, this is what I've learned today. You guys should, kind of take heed and feed into this.
I think it's Devon for state senator. How about that?
Well, good for me.
Got my vote, man.
Certainly smile for it, as well as the intellect.
Appreciate it.
Sounds good to me.
One of the things that I'm currently doing right now, even in this pandemic, is setting up an additional auxiliary or component of my church and writing it into the bylaws, where forever, as long as our church is as it is, named what it is or whatever, that we have a social economic justice arm which addresses these issues with a person who is funded, a person who is employed to do this. Because there is no, as I said earlier, there's no separation between what what theology demands, as we interpret the Bible, demands, and what the streets require in terms of performance. In that, I anticipate addressing Black men head on with these issues that cause them to think that government cannot work for them. And it is a fair statement, if you will, that it is difficult to pay attention to connect your condition with a political condition when you are underemployed, when you are underfed, when you are overly policed, when you are to any degree brutalized. You are distracted. Those do become bigger issues for you than the vote, if you do not have the education or mentor, if you will, to let you know that those things are connected. So we intend to do that because Black men, young Black kings, they need to know before they can be.
Sister Shropshire West, would you weigh in on that?
Yes, I was wondering, and I was listening to Dr. Posley. I think that's such a good idea. I want us to remember the civil rights movement. Who led that movement?
Millennials.
Black church.
That's right.
I mean, it was led by, it almost looked like religious reform. There were so many clergymen leading every aspect of it. Even the ones that joined up front, they brought their churches with them. The resources all came from the Black church. I'd like to see a return to that because, our civil rights movement ended rather abruptly that April morning with the death or the assassination of Dr. King. And then from that, we didn't have a continuation that was good enough. We had Black nationalism that moved right in, took the forefront, and then led in a different way. I'd like to see the church, the Black church. There was a paper I wrote for class. It was called The Peaceful Fortress, and it was the role of the Black church in the civil rights movement. And it was totally led by Black clergy. Now, a lot of clergy, everybody popped in and everybody wanted to get in on it. But I'm telling you, it was the Black church. And I don't say that in a prejudiced way. The Black church is a historical entity. It was our social and economic force long before we had one. And so we need to get back to the leadership of the church and the coalitions we've been talking about. we have so many diverse churches around. We could build those coalitions and make it a separate arm of the church somehow. It doesn't have to be on the main front, but an aspect of the church, because it was a moral high ground that they were taking, and so the church should lead in that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Every movement, every change for the African American, for the Black man, whether from Crispus Attucks, Frederick Douglass, Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King. These were all, each one of these spearheaded, Robert Farmer, all of them. You couldn't be more right, Miss Historian.
Bless your heart. And I love American history, because I know the real American history. We still teach a lot of flowery things about America that's just not the truth. And the truth is, when they broke from England, they really had no right to do it. They said restraint of trade. No, they said stop smuggling. That's what you're doing. They said lack of representation. Well, you're not British. You're a Commonwealth man. Now, they led a whole revolution based on a lie. And so when they said that the British were mistreating them, they weren't mistreating them. They were treating them like every other colony that Great Britain had. The difference was the other colonies of Great Britain weren't nearly as white as this one. And so they weren't fighting for the rights of man like the Enlightenment period they came from. They were fighting for the rights of white men. So just remember that little thought while we're on the 4th of July talking about the British. Remember that.
As we get into again, elections being just a week away, we are particularly seeing a lot of numbers when it comes to early voting and absentee voting. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that those numbers are low in our communities. So as we again get into it, what are some of those reasons why people should vote, and in particular, on a personal note, what are some of the topics and the policies that you will be pushing for after the election, so that we can make sure that we're holding these politicians accountable?
I can tell you a couple of things. One is Tracy talked about voter suppression by design, essentially when she gave the statistics on the early voting places that are not, obviously, the ratios just don't add up. My wife and I went and we early voted this weekend. We're in Marion County. The first day that I think everybody had the same idea on Saturday at 10 o'clock. And, we couldn't even find a parking place. And I'd be willing to bet you that at least 50% of the people who showed up and turned away said, so I think that becomes a problem. I think, number one, we've got to, even though it's been made a little bit more difficult, and we do have record turnout in early voting, we still have to remember that the election has not been completed. The cycle hasn't been completed. So we have to put our foot on the gas, and we have to make people continue to understand that one vote that they will cast does make a difference, whether, they might have to take might have to have a little pain in doing that, but change is an uncomfortable thing anyway. You don't get any type of change without any level of discomfort. And so if people want change, then they're gonna subscribe to the discomfort that goes along with that. And that might mean being in line for 2 or 3 hours until you get the vote. So I think that's one of the things, and I think it's a way that we need to talk about it a little bit more to ensure that we aren't taking our foot off the gas. That's a long-winded answer to a really short question, so I apologize for that.
I'd like to see us kind of focus in on primary elections more. Those are the lowest turnouts I've ever seen. And when I'm out there voting for primary, it's like it's a no man's land out there, as opposed to the national election. I think we should while we're teach them to tie those two together, because once your president gets in office, he's going to need someone in Congress, in the Senate, to take care of the issues that concern all of us. So I just hope we can figure out a way how to increase the primary election turnout. National takes care of itself, but primary is pretty dim.
I'll just add one thing. When you go to vote, I think we're all showing up because it's a presidential election and we're going to elect a new president, new vice president. There's some state senators, but there's some judges on there too. And I don't think that we know enough, or people take the time to know enough about the judges. And think about who we're going to be putting on the bench to be making decisions about cases, and who's going to get imprisoned, who's going to get fined, who's going to have civil decisions for or against them, and what their positions are in general. I mean, if we go back to the Supreme Court, and I think we started out, there was some discussion at some point about the Supreme Court, right? And so when you look at the ideologies on the Supreme Court and where the balances are when they aren't, we've got to know about the entire ticket and not just the 2 or 3 offices that are most popular to discuss at this time.
That's right. That's right. I think on a national level, what I'd like to see, and I really am going to try to talk to some people about where the country is about. I'm a big proponent of this, compulsory voting. You take Germany, Austria, they have 92% participation, 90% participation. 96% participation, Austria, places like that. And so I'm really a big proponent of compulsory vote. I think that I know this is big, but I think big. I'm a man of faith, so I really think I should think big. I think that citizenship should be tied to mandatory voting. That's how I feel. If you are a citizen, one of the things you must do, in my view, is participate in the voting. And it'll do a lot, it'll take away a lot of the gerrymandering. And also take care of a second issue I'd like to see on a national level be addressed relative to voter suppression. And it is doing away with the Electoral College.
Yes.
Electoral College is a relic of slavery. And I believe that we should do away with it. For example, if we did not have the Electoral College just this last 2016 presidential election, we wouldn't have had the president we had for 4 years.
Right.
And
so, in 2000 also.
Yes.
Another time when it didn't follow the way it was supposed to.
It is so that the Electoral College holds the underpinning of gerrymandering and policies, state policies, which allow for voter suppression. So I'd like to see a real movement up on those things to take place.
Plus, it disenfranchised the American voter. President and vice president are the only 2 candidates we can't vote for. And I think that takes away my right to choose. Mm-hmm. So yes, let's by all means get rid of that relic.
And I think too, when you talk to millennials and you kind of put in perspective how legislation actually affects them, I think they look at it differently. And that kind of encourages them to get out and vote. For instance, I had a friend whose grandmother, she takes the bus to work and to the doctor. And when I explained to him this past session, there was a bill to strip Indigo of their funding and what that meant for his grandmother, he kind of, looked at me a little crazy. He was like, how can they do that? And so, I told him, you need to get out and vote and make a change and be a part of the process. I told him, all the times you went to Castleton Square Mall and sit in line for Jordans, but you can't go stand in line for voting, and that actually benefits you. So that I think we should wrap legislation in to how it affects millennials too when we're talking to them, having these talks, because it matters and it affects them, and they just don't realize it until after this, it hits the fan.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example.
I agree. I would only like to add that it has to be an investment of time. I had so many people call me about those 18 judges on the reverse side of their ballot, and I literally had to take the time to read their biographies, read their voting records. I didn't get all the way through the list, but I learned there were some people of color that were represented there around our state. And I think to the young man who was just speaking, we all have to find a way to invest our time, to educate ourselves, to just be all in making sure that we're not making a knee-jerk decision where we're just running down that list and not really knowing, because the justices are not able to campaign. So you are going to literally have to seek out who they are so you'll understand what their voting practices have been and how it affects you.
Yeah, and I was in an election year, really the process of the election, meaning campaigning and selecting who the candidates are going to be, and understanding what their positions are, especially for those who want to be reelected. It's actually about 11 months worth. And unfortunately, we invest a month or two in understanding it and being involved in it when it's a full, I mean, they start in January, right? So it's a full, several months, 11 months. So I don't think that we need to be waiting. I will tell you one thing, outside of COVID, your taxes are due April 15th. If you're not thinking about the election, if you're not thinking about who is going to be making those decisions in April, when you are either waiting on a refund or having to write a check for those taxes, then something's wrong.
Absolutely. Great discussion. I believe that our hosts at the recorder are going to open up the process to allow our viewers to ask questions. And so if that is the case, I don't see any that have been raised yet. So we'll Kelly and I will keep our eyes open for that. But as we're thinking about that, one issue that we haven't discussed a great deal this evening is the Supreme Court. As you know, now Justice Barrett was confirmed on yesterday on a straight party line vote. I wrote my 2 columns ago, I wrote about this particular issue and how she has been likened to her mentor, Justice Scalia, but in many ways it's like Justice Thomas, and now down to exactly the same vote. He was confirmed 52-48, so was she, although hers was a straight party line vote. The Democratic Party, the senators in the party tried to use parliamentary and other maneuvers to delay that vote until after the election. But of course, that's not the case. But I'm curious, and this is open to anyone, to talk about the connection between voting and the Supreme Court.
Well, the importance of voting, of course, is to get a president. And then, since he's the one who makes the appointments to the Supreme Court, then we can have, a court that's kind of balanced, kind of evenly so. This time, I thought it was reprehensible about pushing this nomination through, because I'm still smarting over Merrick Garland when Obama, maybe almost a year in, tried to get a nomination of Garland onto the court, and the Republican Senate wouldn't even listen to him. They wouldn't even talk to him. And it was appalling that all of a sudden, because here they are now in the position with the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that they now can push someone in there. And there's an ulterior motive of this guy pushing this woman through. And he hates Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, or anything Obama did, actually. And so he would like to get rid of this. And so many of these people don't understand the difference between Affordable Care Act and Obamacare. It's the same thing. And so those of you who hate the name Obama, you're thinking you're getting rid of him when you're getting rid of needed health care for possibly your grandmother or your cousin or your mother. So I think it's the Supreme Court has really become all important these days for a few reasons. There's always the Roe versus Wade issue, but now the affordable health, and then the fact that they try to block Obama at every turn. This is why these primaries are important. You won't have people like that blocking the president on things that he's trying to do. So I'm pretty disgusted with what happened. I don't believe in packing the court. I don't think that's the answer. Pretty soon it'll just be packed out because one side will get in, they'll pack, and then the other side will do the same thing. So no, let's not court pack, but let's do put people on there who represent the views of the American people across the board.
I thought it was interesting that, not to get political, but one side did everything they could to pack the court, including shoehorning in this last minute justice, and then accuse the other side of it being, it not being a good thing that this side is going to pack the court. So kind of talking out both sides of the mouth there.
Yeah, that is interesting. The court packing has already begun.
Mhm.
Something which is appalling to me is how the justices are used as political props, so openly used as political props. Amy Barrett, the president of the United States, took a photo op with a Supreme Court justice last night. That should be against the law. That you would pick that not only did you, but you picked a person that was supposed to be basically a judicial ruler for the rest of her life to equitably decide things and issues, and you stand and take a photo part with her as though she is a kill, and that you have just won a trophy, almost holding her up as an example of what he had accomplished for himself versus for the country. And so, Rosalind, I certainly have respect for your comments about packing the court, and I understand why you so intelligently articulated your views so well. But I believe now that since the court packing has begun, it's almost we don't even have the possibility of a fair Supreme Court at this point. We don't be, and that was the intention of a particular party. And so I am concerned now, like with that, what you said, Rosalind, where does it end? Where does it end? I feel like the Supreme Court has been so packed now at this point, it is just a Republican entity. And that's not good for the country in any that turns, as Martin Luther King says, democracy further upside down.
And let's not forget about all of the bias that was in the process. And this is, if you look at this new Justice Barrett, she got her federal appointment when it was snatched from the hands of Myra Selby, who had been appointed by Obama.
Right.
And it was pulled away because the president came into office and he put her Barrett in place as a federal judge, and now she's a Supreme Court justice. So I'm just saying that, that is definitely, of concern. And
I think she will be the least, in terms of experience and court time and cases tried, the least experienced appointee in history, in modern history. That's something to consider. I think she tried one case, or maybe one or not any, though having a private practice for 2 years.
And see, the Supreme Court is no place to grow up.
That's right.
You need to be fully grown once you get there. You need to be experienced once you get there. We don't have time for on-the-job training on the Supreme Court.
We do have a question from a viewer, although I think that she answers her own questions, so maybe you could comment on that. But the question is, how do we start the process to hold our elected officials accountable to end the built-in systemic tools in place that are racially based? And then goes on to suggest the end of the electoral colleges. We've discussed term limits for Congress. We haven't discussed term limits for the Congress and the Senate. Expansion of the Supreme Court, we've talked about that. To correct inequity, redistricting, and ending gerrymandering, we've talked about that. And then getting corporate lobbyists out of politics. So, Devon, would you want to address any or all of that?
I don't know if I can answer all of them, but I definitely agree with the holding the elected officials accountable. Again, I think we should get more involved. We should ask questions. We should demand answers. And if it's something that you're against, I think you should let your elected official know. I think we should definitely bring more qualified candidates to the table. Don't just we can't continue to let elected officials run unopposed, and they've been in their seat for 15 years. We've got to continue to bring qualified candidates. That's kind of my thought on some of that outside of the getting lobbyists out of the game.
I thought you might be interested in wanting to address that one. But what about term limits? We haven't talked about that. Any thoughts?
Well, I think we see now without being too biased, we see now what even the danger of even approaching authoritarianism and how damnable that can be to cultures and to the greater society of America. And so I'm for term limits where best applicable. But Devon just spoke about it. There are people who, regardless to the job they have done, run unopposed and keep a job. Mm-hmm. I think that works against what we're all talking about today, fresh ideas. Mm-hmm. The implementation of new ideologies or expanded or takes on ideology. It closes the door for millennials to come. And it also, speaking to what Ms. Rosalind has said, it also closes the door for opportunities in politics where there are places to grow. Some elected officials are elected to a place, maybe school board, somewhere where you can learn politics and learn other aspects of the political game, if you will. And it's not so expensive on the grander culture or society for you to learn in that place. So term limits can help that, in my view.
Yeah, I think that's why terms were even created in the first place, right? So that we would not create a system of government where people were able to build kingdoms, or people were to essentially be dictators in their own right or in their own mm-hmm. respect as it relates to the people that they are to serve. So we elect them, and we're supposed to have the problem is that it became a broken system, because we've talked about voter suppression. I think there's a candidate suppression component of it too that causes that unopposed running piece of it, and so and it's hurtful. It's hurtful because if you think about it, the longer someone serves in Congress, the more powerful committee appointments they get. So mm-hmm. they get to be the chairs of the Ways and Means Committee or other really powerful committees because of their tenure.
Just merely longevity.
And so exactly. So without term limits, the question was well stated, and I think it is a good answer, because without term limits, we have this continual problem now.
I believe in term limits for every single thing, not just elected officials, but I'm a member of community service organizations, and one of them had a president for nearly 50 years. Wow. Now, she's in her 90s. You know what's going to happen next. And when she goes, her charisma goes with her. And that's what's holding the organization together. Then we had to completely rebuild from that. So not just term limits for these guys who represent us, but for all of the organizations we join, the sororities, whatever we join, I believe in a term limit for that.
And I don't term limit at my church.
Working inside.
Pastors. I rely on their expertise, and I think wisdom comes with age and comes with experience.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Indeed.
I want to add a comment in regard to the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus, how people can get involved. They actually have town hall meetings consistently, and they travel around the state. I've had the opportunity to attend a couple, and they're never, ever crowded. I know that is a wonderful opportunity for people to engage and get involved in. Like Dr. Posey said, bring your fresh ideas. I believe that they will embrace them, and that will give us an opportunity to close some of the gaps to just really engage. And that's one way to get involved, is to attend those meetings and share your ideas.
Absolutely. To that point, I was having this discussion the other day. You know, a lot of people aren't even aware that they can go to the city council meetings, right? That they're open to, these are your elected officials. You have every right to go to those meetings and to speak at the meeting. You have to sign up ahead of time and all that, but to go to those meetings. Also, and there we do have a couple of more questions, but also want to emphasize, because we kind of mentioned this in passing, but the importance of the school board as well. Let's not overlook that. President's important, governors, senators, congress people, all of that. But the school board, if you talk about what really affects your local community, who you put on your school board is incredibly important. And taking the time to educate yourself about the different stances of the different candidates for school board is something that is incredibly important. But the question that has come up is around civic education in our schools, and what can or should we do to ensure that our young people, while they are in school, are learning about how the government works just at a basic level. If you ask the average middle school, high school student, they probably couldn't tell you. Most of them probably couldn't tell you. So how do we go about doing that?
Yeah, you know, I think a couple of things. One is, you know, I think many of us kind of grew up in, I know when I was coming up through middle school and high school, these were required courses. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I learned some things. I learned some basic things that I circled back around to later in life and said, oh, that's what that made sense. But the thing that probably was most impactful for me was when I was in college and participated in the Student Government Association, right? And so I had this opportunity to actually see it in action and be involved in it. I think that there's a combination of the two. I think it's what you learn in the classroom, but also what you're able to put in the practice through experiential learning. So to me, I think not only should civics be back into the core curriculum, there ought to be a extracurricular or co-curricular activity required that students are involved in some level of their own governing, if you will, as a governing, being involved in a governing body to understand how government and different committees and branches and all those things work, to kind of see it play out.
I agree. I think it's curriculums. I think that's another component of it. I actually own a company that writes curriculums for schools, for various types of schools, and we have to create curriculums which give as much attention for the students to these subjects as STEMs do, because this is just as important. And to be honest with you, the impact of voting and political positioning and understanding is going to be more a part of their experience, particularly as an African-American youth, as much as math or as much as science. So I do those curriculums. I've written them for other schools, and I think this has to happen. We have to shape what we want our kids to understand based on the projections of what we believe they need to know later.
IPS actually had that as part of the curriculum. It was government and economics. And I can remember there was no option. Those things you had to take. Now, there were some options for other classes, some electives, but those two were not electives. Those were requirements. And that's how you got to learn about this city, or I did, the mile square, what all of that means. Now, this was before Unigov, so I didn't learn that, but still, this is what we learned.
I echo the same. I attended IPS Arlington, and I know that Clyde went to the same classes that I attended, and it was required. And that's where I got my framing, and it was a wonderful experience. And I felt like I was ready to engage with the electoral process as a young person because I had the information and education from high school.
Right. And interestingly enough, I think it's noteworthy that we had an African-American teacher that went beyond the book, Mr. Brown, and he talked about how this affects your future as an African-American person, as well as how it has been formed in history.
And I second everything everybody said. being a North Central Panther, it was required in our courses as well. But at the same time, I took the initiative to join things like CLD, Project Mister. I was also president of the Black History Club in North Central, where we took tours to HBCUs, and that's how I kind of got acquainted to different things that weren't being taught in the school. So I think it's mixing both together, the in-course curriculum and also a little bit of outside engagement as well.
Mhm.
Awesome. I echo that. My first real introduction into politics was my senior year in high school, and we had our own election. I ran as John Kerry. I lost even in that election, so I'm still a little salty about that because I thought I ran an amazing race, but so I want to thank everyone for being here. This is such an impactful and educational conversation. You all are brilliant, and I am so honored to have sat on this panel with you all and with Larry to lead the conversation. Does anybody have any final thoughts as we close out this evening? Again, we are 7 days away from the election. If you have one piece of advice that is burning inside of you for our viewers and for those people that haven't voted yet, what would that be?
I would tell millennials to give the voting process a chance. I would speak to millennials and ask them, is it possible that every person who has been telling you to vote, senior, your mother, your parent, is it possible that they're all wrong? Give voting a chance, young person.
Well, I encourage the conversation to continue while you're standing in line, even if you're talking to the person next to you. Find out if there is a millennial in their family who just refuses to vote, who doesn't see the necessity of it, or who just doesn't see that it gets you anywhere. Talk to those people and have them communicate with those young people that, you guys have to go on. Here we are wearing down. It's up to you now. So you're going to need to be where we are right now.
Mhm. I would just say to use the platforms that are appealing to millennials. Use social media. Ask them if they voted. Have courageous conversations. In addition to that, encourage them to post when they have voted. Ask them if they have taken a friend to vote or contacted a family member. As Rosalind said, just keep the conversation going and be willing to have those difficult conversations. Of course, if it will lead to change and having people have a different frame of thinking around voting.
And I would just say, know who is influencing the policies that are most important to you, the things that are affecting your life the most, which means that you've got to become very educated on the person and the policy.
I would tell my fellow millennials, we can be on IG, Twitter, and stand in line. I think we've got an advantage because of social media today. So, stand in line and scroll and do it that way. I mean, we stand in line for Yeezys and everything else. Do something impactful and that's going to dictate our future in our communities and our families.
Oh, thank you. Dr. Posley, before we close for the evening, I would love if you could speak a little bit more about Souls to the Polls so that people that need a ride, know someone that needs a ride, can have that information available to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just want to remind everyone, Souls to the Polls is still going on. This is the final weekend, the final 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, as well as Monday. And we're going to make sure, I'm trying to pull up the number here. We're going to make sure that every person that wants a ride has access to the ride, and the numbers for you to be picked up at these locations. These numbers are 317-821-7539 and 802-951-5157. And just very quickly, you can be picked up from the Antioch Church, from the Mount Olive Church at 16th and Mount Com, the Tabernacle Church at 30th and Dearborn, the Crossroads AME Church at 46th and College, the Pilgrim Baptist Church at 36th and Clifton, New Direction Church at 38th and Hawthorne, and the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church at 38th and Forest Manor. And we also have what I call We have two vans that are rovers. They are picking up persons from their homes and taking them to the early voting locations. All the buses are being sanitized before every run. We have snacks on the bus. We're taking information. We're taking names. We're exchanging numbers so we can know how to stay in touch with you. It's going well. Miss Tracy was with me this weekend, and we took pictures and had a ball, and we helped seniors who did not know that this was available, some even until just that Saturday. And so thank you for the opportunity to do that, and thank everyone who has made this, especially William Duke Oliver, City County Councilman, who's my co-chair with this. Thank everyone for helping us get people to the polls.
Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, our seasoned saints, as I like to call them, specifically in COVID, it has been, I can only imagine, an even larger barrier to get them to the polls. So thank you for this opportunity for them to continue to exercise their right that I'm sure a lot of them have been doing for many a year, probably longer than I've been alive. So thank you to that. Also, early voting is still going on. It concludes November 2nd at the City County building, which has just extended its hours. So go to vote.indy.gov. You will get the information there, and all of the satellite locations for early voting will also commence on November 1st. So please do not go to an additional early voting location on November 2nd. You won't be the first in line. I can tell you that. You might be just standing there looking around. So make sure that you go to vote.indy.gov to get all of the information that you need. Again, thank you to the Indianapolis Recorder for having me co-moderate this conversation. It has been an honor. And Larry, if you have anything you'd like to say?
I thought you did an excellent job, Kelly, along with all of our panelists. Thank you thanks to all of you, and also to our host, Indianapolis Recorder.
Awesome. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you for
Thank you.
Great job, everyone.